Test.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
Well, good evening, everyone. Today is June 27th, 2024. This is a special session of your Unified Government of Wyandotte County Board of Commissioners. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that we have individuals attending remotely as well as on site. All participants joining by phone should please mute your phones at this time and make sure that's done to avoid any background noise for others that may be speaking. During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak so the public that is participating knows exactly who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and its current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General's offices. And then when you speak, please make sure you speak into the microphone to ensure your comments are heard and that an accurate record is made for our clerk. I will now call this meeting to order. Clerk, can you announce the meeting and give us our roll call, please?
Good evening. You are hereby notified that a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas is scheduled to be conducted in a hybrid format on Thursday, June 27th, 2024 at 5 p.m. for a budget workshop in the fifth floor conference room of the municipal office building. Roll call: Lopez,
Here.
Stites, Davis, Bynum, Burrows, Townsend,
Present.
Burns,
Here.
Ramirez, Hill,
Here.
Kane. We have an absence memo. Garner.
Here, thank you. This evening, we're continuing the work regarding our budget for 2025. And throughout our series of budget workshops, we'll have different items for consideration for your Unified Government Board of Commissioners. I'm going to turn it over to our county administrator, Mr. David Johnson, to open up the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we continue down our budget workshops, today we're talking about the issues of revenue neutral versus non-revenue neutral. And I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Fiscal Officer, Dr. Knieven, and our Budget Director, Reggie Lindsay.
Thank you very much. And we will have copies of our presentation here shortly. We were busy making copies on the copier, so they'll be here just shortly. But if we can go ahead and pull up the presentation, I'll wait just a quick minute. I'll go ahead and just kind of give you an overview. So a little bit, as the mayor mentioned, we've had quite a bit of work that's been being done on the budget. Working with you all as a mayor and a commission. We have had 5 workshops since February. The end of February was the first one. We've had 1 public hearing. We had the dot talks, and that was an invitation, of course, for public comment. And then tonight, we're going to have another workshop to discuss the proposed resolution of the intent to exceed revenue neutral rate. So that's just an overview of all the dates and the meetings we've had before and the presentations. And there's been a wealth of information provided by the budget office to help inform the process throughout. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to request that the mayor and the commission approve the resolution with the intent to exceed revenue neutral for the city and the county property tax rates. Those property tax rates are our mill levies. Those terms are interchangeable. And that will be considered in the regular session. So we're hoping that tonight we can provide you with information as to why we're making this request. But the only action that we are asking for is that this resolution be adopted by the mayor and the commission. What we are not requesting is any kind of tax rate tonight. We are not asking you to set the tax rate. There's a lot of information that needs to be brought before you could actually do that in an informed way. This does not approve any specific policy decisions, including information that will be presented tonight. For example, our constitutional offices are going to present information. We are not asking you to make a decision. It's just receiving the information. And this does not commit to any expenditure request that you may know of or that have come before you before. So all we are requesting is the resolution, which keeps the budget process moving forward so that we can provide you information. The county administrator gets an opportunity to present a budget. And then at that point is when you would actually set the tax levy, decide what the tax levy would be. And it does not prevent you from ultimately going revenue neutral, if that should be the direction that the commission wanted to go. So the resolution does not commit you to anything except for allows for the process to continue. So in order to cover a few things tonight, we're going to have the presentation by the constitutional offices. We're going to give you an overview of some projected revenues for the city and the county, in particular, the general fund tonight, because it's good illustrative purposes. We want to highlight some thoughts that we have on the BPU pilot relief. And then we want to talk about the next steps in the process. So with that, we've got the asterisk entities up above on the board have indicated they would like to speak. We've asked them to keep that to about 10 minutes each. Again, they'll be sharing information with you about their current budget, about their budget request for next year. It's an opportunity for you to dialogue with them, but we are not asking for a decision on any of these requests at this time. It just gives them an opportunity to present that information to you all directly. So with that, I'll ask the district attorney to come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I will say in advance, thank you. I'm looking at my clock. When I practice, I don't know if I was thinking 10 minutes, usually about 20 or 30, but I'm sure I can make this happen, commissioners. Okay, let's go quickly here. I want to first appreciate all of you commissioners and staff. Thank you so much for all that you do. I try my best to stay on my side of the street, but I thought it was very important to come and talk to you today, specifically concerning this matter. We are requesting funds this year. This is something that I think is extremely important. So when I got into office in 2017, there was two victims advocates. Victims advocates are the individuals who are the liaison between victims of crime as well as the district attorney and the courts. It is their role and in their jobs to make sure that victims of crimes in this community have information on what's going on in the case that they are a part of. No problem. I thought it was perfect timing. And so with that, I'll start with what the law says. This is so important that the Kansas legislature many decades ago made it a statute according to KSA 747333. And I would encourage all of you to go ahead and take a look at that. But ultimately, it is the victims' Bill of Rights. And when individuals have a crime that occurs to them, there are multiple things that the district attorney's office is statutory obligated to make sure that we do. And the number one thing is making sure that victims are treated with courtesy and compassion and respect, that information regarding the case from the beginning of the case to the conclusion of the case is told to them, any services that are available to them, any assistance, wraparound services, treatment, and so on and so forth. The law says by statute that the district attorney's office is obligated to make sure that it is done. Advocacy is bottom line what victims advocates do. Sufficient advocacy present ensures equitable advocacy for all victims. And so I want to talk to you real quickly about what the victims advocates do in our office. They handle homicide cases, death cases, rape and sexual assault, and domestic violence cases. And ultimately, it breaks down to the percentage of caseloads that we have right there. You can see homicide, rape, and domestic violence takes up a vast majority of the cases that we have going on in our office. From start to finish, and I would like to state to the folks that may be watching online, you as commissioners, you have this in front of you, and if you don't, we can make sure you get an email, but I put all this in the presentation. I'm not going to read all of this, but I wanted you to have from start to finish what a case looks like in our office. And the victims advocates, the moment that the police are called and the case is referred to our office after the investigation happens, it's our victims advocates role and responsibility to have direct contact with the victims and with the families of crime. In any case that occurs in our office, when you're dealing with victims, you're not just dealing with the person who was the victim of crime, but you're usually dealing with the entire family, and you're dealing with all the folks that have any type of first, second, or third secondary trauma that comes with being a person connected to the person that has been victimized. And so their job is to connect with them, to meet with the families, to set up meetings with the assistant district attorney, and likewise with myself. When I got into office, I made it a priority and a mandate that every person who loses a loved one to crime in this community meets directly with me. It is the victims advocate's role to make sure that all of those folks meet directly with me, as well as the assistant district attorney. Their job is also to make sure that all of these folks, according to statute, know when the hearings are. And you can see through the court proceedings, we got over 37 hearings from numerous dockets hearing, meaning from the time that a case is filed to the time that a case goes to trial, there are dozens upon dozens of court appearances. And by statute, we have to make sure that all of those victims and witnesses are aware of those hearings and proceedings. And if we do not, then it violates the statute all the way through jury trial. And then likewise, what happens is once the trial is done, we have post-conviction, and you have appeals courts and appeals to the Supreme Court and so on and so forth. Hence, these cases never go away for our victims advocates. They continue to reach out and talk to our office and get the information. I made this slide because it's important to know, and I want to give kudos to the 4 victims advocates that we have in our office who worked tremendously hard to make this presentation and put it together. But ultimately, after we put our numbers together, there was a guesstimation ultimately of every hour that we have in a 40-hour work week and 52 weeks in the year, you're looking at about 1,800 plus hours of available work. Well, our victims advocates work over 1,900 hours. And that means that they're coming in on their days off. That means that they stay late. That means that they get in early. And it's because they take their responsibility, their statutory responsibility, very serious to make sure that they have contact with these folks so that cases won't go on without everyone knowing. I'm going to rush through this part because I see that my time is down. I'm to about 5 minutes. So you can look at the rest of this yourself. But ultimately, what you have here is when we don't have enough victims advocates, then you don't have the information given to the victims of crime and to the witnesses of crime. And it affects the relationship with the district attorney's office and the community, and thereby affects how law enforcement and the community's relationship is. When we have victims who are not contacted, who doesn't have that advocacy, who doesn't feel like anyone is explaining to them what is happening and how the process works, then they're less likely to cooperate. They're less likely to show up to court. They're less likely to be the witness that we need them to be to get the bad people off of the streets, which is why it's so important that we are here today. In our office, we have 4 victims advocates, and we have 2 to 3 full load advocates on the screen because when I got here, it was 2 victims advocates in 2000, I believe 18, we came back and we said, okay, clearly we need more advocates than this. We requested more funding. We didn't get it that year, but in 2019, you all gave it to us with the Conviction Integrity Unit assistance. And so the victim advocate that goes with the Conviction Integrity Unit also assists with some of the cases that we have on the main level of cases. Now, with that, we then went out and we found a grant. because we realized that we needed to find more money to get victims the support and the help that we needed. And we were able to get a grant that is now being sustained for the last, I believe, 4 years. And that is a sex crime victims advocate. And this individual deals with sex crimes that are from the age of 11 on up. She's able to assist in those cases, which is why we say we have really 3.5 victims advocates rather than the full 4. And so that puts us at the 3.5 marks of victims advocates. The best practices says that any DA's office should have no more than 150 cases per victims advocate. On average, our counterparts across the state and in the region are averaging about 300 victims advocates at this point per case. We are at 950 cases per victims advocate. And so what we're saying is not only are we ridiculously outnumbered by the amount of victims that we are serving, but it is absolutely affecting the way that victims are seen in our office and how they feel. Because at the end of the day, when it comes down to prioritizing, how do you prioritize one victim over the other? Let me tell you the answer. You don't. Every victim is important, and so every victim needs the services. So what we're requesting is 4 additional victims advocates. That will not get us to where we need to be via best practices, but it will get us down to about 500 to 600 cases per victims advocate. That will then get us to the position where I believe we're not violating the statute and hence doing what the statute requires for us to do, which is meeting with all of these victims and witnesses and making sure that they have the information that they need. The dollar amount is on the screen there. That $97,000 per victims advocate includes the benefits that they would have, and ultimately that would be reoccurring. And as I conclude in my 30 seconds to give you any time that I have for questions, is for office space, because we are in a wonderful, wonderful old building. We would take a file room that we have and we would renovate it. And that would take about $8,000 to renovate to give us more offices there in our location. The software upgrade, it is there. I would like to say to all of you, because I know I have talked to many of you, if you look back in my 22, 23 budget, 21 budget as well, there was $100,000 for software upgrade. We have worked with the tech folks over here, names are leaving me as I speak so fast, and did an analysis, and we do not need $100,000 as we have generally done for the last several years, minus last year because of all of the software upgrades. We need simply the $50,000 moving forward. And so that's not something new. It's in fact something that we have continued to do, but it is a 50% decrease. And so I thought wherever I could say we're asking for less, it would be good to show off for the commissioners on that. All right, I'm done. All right, she said, good job. Any questions that you have for me? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. You all have a blessed evening.
Thank you so much. And whoever wants to come up next.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioner, Administrator. My name is Susie Nelson. I'm the Register of Deeds. Just want to give you a brief overview of what our office does. The Register of Deeds is a custodian of land records for the county. I'm responsible for recording and preserving those land records. Currently, we record over 100 different types of documents in our office. We record deeds, mortgages, plats, surveys, assignments, and releases of mortgages, just to name a few. And it is through these recordings of the deeds that the tax roll is built and maintained. The office is governed by state statute. We implement statutory changes, system upgrades, program and procedure evaluation, And we're continuing to develop our staff to assure a high level of customer service for our citizens. The Register of Deeds office is a revenue generating office. The revenue we generate each year for the entire year more than covers our budget annually. And out of our budget, 3% is for operating expenses. We also have a special fund for the Register of Deeds. It's called a technology fund. And we've used that in the past to do a data migration where we pushed over 214,000 documents into our primary search software called Laredo. And we're currently working on another data migration where we will push 368,000 documents into Laredo, and that'll give us documents back to 1955. And that'll be 69 years in our primary search engine. And typically the title companies, they search back 40 to 50 years when they're doing title searches, and sometimes they go back further. And our Laredo is a subscription. They can purchase a subscription to use it so they don't have to come in the office. And we have noticed that there aren't as many title people that do come in the office. They have subscriptions to utilize that. And I'm just going to close with this. Just so you all know, this year we have seen a decrease in recordings. And I compared it to last year. We're down about 800 documents, same time as last year. And we attribute that to mortgage rates are higher than they were, and cost of housing and everything else. Do you have any questions for me? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Anita Peterson, and I am the District Court Administrator. Chief Judge Robert Burns had another commitment this evening, so he asked me to come over here, and he had some thoughts that he wanted me to let you guys know about. So the District Court is unique in our budget relationship with the unified government, given that we are not one of your departments. Pursuant to KSA 20-348, however, the UG Board of Commissioners is statutorily required to provide all operating expenses incurred for the operation of the district court. The vast majority of our overall budget is for salaries, and those are exclusively paid for by the state of Kansas. The remainder of our budget is the responsibility of the UG and includes items such as office equipment, computers, interpreters, contract attorneys, pro tem judges, jury costs, and facilities to conduct court. These items are simply what is necessary for the court system to function as intended and necessary to protect and promote justice. The district court has historically made a concerted effort to operate with fiscal restraint and has only requested the minimal budget necessary to operate an efficient and effective court system for the people of Wyandotte County. We are not seeking any significant increase in our budget for 2025 as we strive to continue to practice fiscal responsibility. I'm particularly proud of the dedicated non-judicial employees who constitute the heart and soul of our court system. Since I became chief judge in 2019, we have adapted and survived the challenges presented by COVID, the UG cyber attack in April of 22, and statewide cyber attack of the Kansas court system in October of 2023. Our employees have been resilient throughout this period, and we have persevered to make sure that everyone has access to the court system while also strengthening the security of our computer systems. These challenges, though, have not come without added financial cost. Naturally, the enhanced computer safety measures we have instituted are not cheap or simple, but are necessary and warranted expenses for the operation of the court system. We have established our own secured computer network and continue to implement additional safeguards and licenses to protect the privacy of the personal information contained in many court filings. I anticipate an increase in our budget request in future years and it will be unavoidable given the rising costs of maintaining a secure computer system, but I am optimistic we can get through 2025 without asking for additional funds. I also wanted to alert you to the distinct possibility of somewhat significant increases in costs for jurors in the near future. While the volume of jury trials has decreased over the last several years, the number of jury trials conducted in a given year is a variable that we cannot predict. In addition, there are capital murder cases presently set for both February of 2025 and February of 2026, which could pose significant costs if they indeed do proceed to jury trial. Again, we do our best to minimize the expense of jury trials, but that is something beyond our direct control. Once again, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the budgetary needs of the Wyandotte County District Court. And please know that I will make myself available to meet with you and discuss the local budget for the court or any other matters associated with the operation of our judicial district. Sincerely, Chief Judge Robert P. Burns. Any questions? Thank you.
Do we have a question?
All righty. Right. Good evening, everybody. So I've had the pleasure of sitting here several times and addressing this group. And on many occasions, we've got to have the conversation of what's the sheriff's office do? Why do we do it? The statutes that dictate what I do, not necessarily how I do everything, but definitely what I do. And we've also, on numerous occasions, had the conversation about what the responsibility is for the commission and the unified government when it comes to funding the things that, somebody else, quite frankly, is telling me that I'm going to do. And so I was a little presumptuous, I guess, and I didn't provide any numbers because I thought you guys would have our stuff in front of you. But what I will tell you about our budget when you get it or you get the chance to look at it, the numbers that we've put in, the increases that we've put in capital or operating aren't because I dictate what food is going to cost. It's not because I can dictate how many we're going to have in-house in the facility. I don't control any of those costs. And when you look at the increases that come along with our budget for this year, that's what they are. They're increases that we are all seeing every single day. I know I've said this to this group before. The sheriff's office is very unique in the functions that we serve. But one of those is running a small city across the street. And so as we see these increases in housing, medical, food, custodial, that's all stuff that I wish I could tell them, nope, we're not going to do it. But all of those things that I just mentioned, there's one single statute that says, but Sheriff, you are going to do it. And we're going to do it in a way that is safe for not only the employees, but for the inmates that are being housed there, and what is safe for the community. So that's one side of it. The other side of the budget, you'll see increases in things for equipment for vehicles themselves, some updates to some computers, kitchen equipment. Again, there's probably not many departments coming in front of you that are having to buy kitchen equipment. A remodel to the jail intake area. Anybody that's ever been inside that area, it's been like that since the day it was built. Exposed wiring at this point, desks that built-ins that have been taken out because they've been broken. There's been no remodel or improvements to those areas. And so, you know, those are costly. Adding some more feeder doors to some cells in the facility, again, goes back to safety for not only staff, but inmates as well. And so those are just some things that I mean, high level that I wanted to bring to your attention. When you get that chance, when you look at our numbers, it goes back to, it's not, these are not things that we sat around and said, well, I think we're gonna follow this statute today. I think we're gonna follow that one today. I have to follow all of them at the exact same time and do what they all say. And so what that amounts to is increases in just about every single area. You know, you can't go to the grocery store, can't go buy a vehicle. You can't do anything now without there being an increase in that cost. And that's the exact same thing that we see every single day. The things that we are doing, the numbers that you're going to see in your budget information are things that I am required by state law to do. And for years and years and years, the sheriff's office, along with many departments in the UG, have been asked to make cuts 3%, 6%. I think there was a 7% one year maybe. And the sheriff's office has always risen to that and has worked with this commission and this governing body to do that. The problem is there becomes a point when there's nothing else to cut. You have cut, you know, if you want to call it fluff, fine. It wasn't even fluff at the time, but you've cut back to the minimum. And that's where we're at. We're not, we don't exist to provide minimums. We exist to provide a service the right way and what's right for everybody involved. And so, you know, as we've cut things like training budgets and ammo budgets over the years, it's caused us to have to come back and ask for more as those things have increased. And so what you'll see in front of you when you get it, and maybe you have it, I don't know, is a list of the have-tos, the things that as the sheriff, I don't get to say, I don't want to do. We're gonna do them. We have to do them. Lots of things that factor into it. I know you all know this, but I always like to point it out. I don't control how long somebody comes to my jail or who comes to my jail. I don't control how long they stay there. I don't control what medical needs they may have while they're there. I don't even control when they get released, although I think some people maybe think I do. I have no say over any of that. So I become the middleman that has this requirement set in front of him. It's a great honor to have that, but at the same time, we've got to do what's right. And unfortunately, that cost takes money. So, like I said, I didn't prepare anything for you because I thought you'd have some stuff in front of you. What I would ask is as you guys go through the budget documents, if you have specific questions, bring them to me, however that needs to be done. I'd be more than happy to sit down and explain exactly how we got to where we got on any specific issue if you have it. But otherwise, I would take any questions that you guys may have. All righty. Thank you.
Before we move on, I have a question for the DA. If you-
I'm sorry.
Spot, DA, but-
I simply said I should have left when I had the chance is what I
Right.
did. Yeah. Please, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, you talked about victim services.
Yes.
I know that the police department has a victim services unit. I don't know if you know what they do. Is there Is there an overlap of services there? I know sometimes when I was on the police department, the DA would sometimes service the same individuals that, I'm gonna just say my staff at the time would service. I don't know if that's a duplication of service that maybe we could look at. Has it been looked at? How could we better, maybe collaborate, to, enhance those services in a way that, to minimize, any potential duplication? I just don't know where we're at with that, question.
Well, and I thank you for that question, Mr. Mayor. It was a very good question and one that I do know a tad bit about. And I'll just use the example of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. As many of you know, that the District Attorney's Office, we handle 8 different agencies, including but not limited to Edwardsville Police Department, Bonner Springs Police Department, some cases from Lake Quivira, the Sheriff's Department, so on and so forth, and so many task force and universities and colleges, and all of them have their own different policing agencies, and with them, they tend to have their own victims advocates. Using KCK, since it is our biggest law enforcement agency locally, they have 7. In fact, it's supposed to be 8, but they're down 1. 7 victims advocates, and their role as victims advocates are to show up on the scene when a crime happens to assist with those victims. The way a case works, as I indicated on that screen, it's not until a case is filed in my office that my victims advocates are, if you will, put into play. Up until the point that the case comes to my office, the victims advocates with the policing agency are the ones who are being the liaison, and they are the point of contact with law enforcement and the victims on those cases. It's their sole responsibility to make sure that they know what's going on and that they inform the victims and witnesses of that case and what's happening. Unless and until the case is brought to my office for charging. Sometimes that may be 3 months, sometimes that may be 6 months, sometimes that's 6 years. Until that case is brought over, my office doesn't know anything about that case until it gets there, right? So on average, it's about a 3 to 6 months process for the police department and their victims advocates that they work with those victims, and then they hand the victims over to my office. Well, with my office, once we take the torch, hence we have those victims, it goes on for years. Because now we have the trial, now we have the post convictions, we have the preliminary hearings, we have the appeals, and so on and so forth. So just to put into context, Kansas City, Kansas Police Department has 7 victims advocates for the city of Kansas City, Kansas. The DA's office has 3.5 victims advocates for all of Wyandotte County. Kansas City, Kansas Police Department deals with 3 to 6 months of servicing those victims. The Wyandotte County DA's office deals with 3 to 6 years of dealing with victims, families, and witnesses. I say that because of the compare and contrast. They need those many to do their job for their city. But as a county, I have way more law enforcement agencies and way more victims of crime and not enough assistance and help. So 1, yes, they have their own. 2, their services do not overlap with mine because it is pre my charging. And then thirdly, they need to keep theirs and we just need to give us more so that statutorily we can do what we're required to do by law.
Right. Thank you, Brother Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Commissioner Townsend has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you, Mayor. Greetings, DA. Some of the questions that I was going to ask, your answers were full enough that that were taken into account from the questions the mayor asked. But going back to how long your victims advocates on average deal with servicing a case from the time it's assigned to them. You said it's from the time it's handed over, there are charges filed through in being held at the sheriff or if they're on probation or whatever, but through the trial or sentencing, whatever that outcome is, and through incarceration, if that is the result, it goes that long?
Yes, ma'am, and beyond. And so there are, via the statute, so when an individual, let's take that instance, they go to prison. Well, if up for parole, then statutorily, the DOC is supposed to let our office know that this person is coming up for parole, and then it's our statutory responsibility then to alert the victims that this person is up for parole and to get their input on whether or not we should object or not object, and or simply letting them know, hey, this person who committed this crime is about to be back on the street, so you need to know, right? And if you need any help or assistance, or if you feel like there's, so point being is, quite frankly, until sometimes the death of the defendant or the victim, our office is in contact with these families all the time.
So if there is, say, a sentence in a particular case of 10 years, a victim's advocate in your office would have that case for at least 10 years. Some victim advocate would have to be responsible for at least that duration, as an example, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. That was it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Mayor, I also had a question that would probably be more, goes back to the court system. I didn't want to ask it because Ms. Peterson is sub, but if she could answer it, if possible. She talked about the cost or the likelihood of more trials coming up in the future. I'd like to know, what are some of the costs attended to jurors that go into the budgeting process? I, for one, had never thought about cost for jurors. So I'd just like to know what some of those costs might include, if she can answer.
Is she still here or?
She has left.
Okay, she
Okay.
left, Commissioner. Is anybody from staff? Do we have a kind of a roundabout estimate of that cost?
I do know that when there are more court, like if more court dates going on, they do have to call in more jurors. So that definitely is an increased cost. And one thing she mentioned is that they're expecting more capital murder cases possibly. And so they will have to bring in more jurors for that. And when you have those capital murder cases, you do have to bring in a larger sample of jurors just to get down to like who you may end up picking for those.
Do we know what that budget is? I'm sorry. Brother, I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to share that the
District
jury
Attorney.
pays $10 per day. So if you have a capital trial, it's going to go on longer. So that's part of why the cost goes up.
Thank you. And Mark Dupree, DA, and one of the things that I would indicate, one, we do not expect more capital punishment cases. I just want to clear that up. But we may expect capital cases going to jury trial of the ones that we already have. We don't want any more, just to put it out there. But with that, for instance, in our analysis, we are having to guesstimate that we're going to bring up nearly 1,000 individuals for each jury trial. Normally, it's just anywhere from 60 to 150 jurors that we bring in for a jury trial, whereas for a capital murder case, you're looking at that 500 to 1,000 because there's so many legal ways for attorneys to have to strike those jurors. And that going to the $10 per day per person, whether or not they're on the jury or not, will add up. And it also will add up with the court personnel and the amount of time that happens. So
I guess, I'm a data-driven type person. Where are we gathering the data or to, I guess, reinforce the expectation that the jury pool will increase for these cases? Because I'm just looking at, if you talk to the chief of police, crime is actually down historically. So I'm trying to get the correlation.
Well, and I agree with the chief. The crime is down and violent crime specifically 27%. And I believe that the law enforcement in this county is doing their job. So kudos for that. But I do think, Mr. Mayor, that when it comes down to the jury trials, and I think the chief judge letter kind of stated that we can't guesstimate how many jury trials we will have, because 85%, if not more, of all cases that that are charged in our county and across the country end in a plea, right? And they don't go. However, when we have right now 2 capital murder cases that have been on the books for several years now, and I will tell this commission that the court, the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, along with the unified government staff and personnel have been working diligently to make sure that we're planning accordingly for that amount of jurors. When you're looking at a capital case versus a normal jury trial, let's say it's a normal burglary case and it's the simple 12, it will take maybe a half a day or a day to pick that jury. But when you're dealing with capital murder and ultimately in Kansas, death penalty is still on the table, the statute gives that defendant a lot more rights in that jury trial process. And that jury picking of a jury is going to take minimally a week. And sometimes it could take up to 4 weeks to even pick it versus a day for a regular burglary. And so those are the factors that are included when we're talking about the number of jurors as well as the amount of time and dollars.
Thank you. I guess all things considered, and I didn't consider the costs from our juries and those citizens that put forth their civic duty to help our criminal justice system. But with crime being down, and I know we're talking unknowns as far as those figures, I guess what would ease my curiosity, just based on what Commissioner Townsend had asked about that cost, is the cost right now, based on the estimates that we have currently, is that sufficient? Because I haven't heard anybody say we need more money for juries.
Now, I'm standing in for the chief judge, but I'll tell you that what we're looking at right now is the cases that are already on the books. So not looking or guesstimating on what may come in. And yes, crime is down, but we still have 1,400 cases, felony cases that we're dealing with over there. And we don't know whether or not they're all going to go to trial or, again, 85 to 90% of them going to play out.
I guess this is for staff. Have we budgeted accordingly based on those estimates that the district attorney and the district courts have given us, as far as the potential possibility for, the necessity to finance those jury pools? Or
Currently, the district court, they haven't asked for anything over their base budget for 2025.
that answers the question. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis has his hand raised.
Commissioner Davis?
Thank you, Mayor, and my apologies to the public and colleagues. I'm not feeling the best, and so I had to get home to make sure I'm well and still able to attend this meeting. DA, thank you so much for your presentation. I did want to ask you, because I know we had some conversation, the $97,000, which is both salary and benefits, that number, is that just metro-wide, or where did you come up with that figure for salary and benefits for these positions?
That was based off of the victims advocates that we have in our office now and the pay scale that the unified government has them on. And so we try to keep a balanced pay scale based off of what we already have them on. So we didn't really look, though I will tell you that all of my victims advocates said that they wanted to do a regional pay grade and scale. And I said that to fight for another day, the focus is getting help. So the numbers that you have is based off of what we have had in our office for the last several years. And then the benefits and all of that, likewise, again, is fall in line with the scale that the unified government has utilized for our victims advocates.
Okay, gotcha. I mean, these are really, really important positions, and they do have in implication on just our society overall. So appreciate the work of your staff on this, because this is nothing to play with. And I know it's not easy work. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, DA. Oh, sorry, one more, Commissioner Burns.
Yeah, I think you need to keep in mind, on a jury budget, I think the state law allows it to go up to $50 per day for jurors if you want to do that. So that's county optional, though. It would have to be up to the commission to do that. For example, if you went at $10 per day and then you go to 20, that $250,000 budget is now $500,000. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And I think the DA would agree with me too. You never know when grand juries may have to go into effect too, and they're not cheap.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I think the judge didn't mention that, but I will.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Wyandotte County DA.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just to note, you should have a copy from the Election Commission, a memo that they has provided. And throughout the budget process, you will be seeing the requests from not only these constitutional offices and the requests that they've made, but all of the departments will come forward to you all throughout this process, throughout the next couple of months. So you will be getting all of those details. You'll see what was requested, and then ultimately what's recommended by the county administrator. And then ultimately you all will make the decision as to what's funded. So one of the topics, as I said, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide you with some information, because on the regular agenda, we had the resolution for the intent to exceed revenue neutral. And as I mentioned, that is not setting the tax rate. That is not committing you to not go revenue neutral. It's simply preserving the option. So tonight you just heard a couple of requests from a couple of the offices that mean more money. And throughout my presentation, I will be sharing information with you about some other things that we already know would be affecting the budget, but we're still going through the process. And it's a bit unfortunate because the process that's set forth in state statute, which was adopted in 21, gets a little bit ahead of our typical process. So we have to ask you to adopt a resolution before you've had all the information, before we've had the opportunity to even finish forecasting all the revenues so that you can make an informed decision. So what happens in the state process that they've outlined for you all is that you are asked to approve this resolution or not approve it. And if you don't approve it, that essentially means that we're going revenue neutral. That would be making a decision by not acting. We're simply asking you to defer that decision until you have all the information. So we want to preserve that right. We have until July 20th, which is when we have to file with the court or with the UG clerk. And so we have a little bit of time, but not a lot of time. There is a firm deadline that's set forth in state statutes. Then there's a mailing to all the taxpayers that also outline when the public hearing will be held. So there's actually another actual public hearing on the revenue neutral rate and on the tax levy, as well as the UG budget for both the city and for the county. We tentatively have scheduled that public hearing for August 26th. This has been on the calendar that was provided to you all by the budget office. And we're required statutorily to submit the final budget adopted by the mayor and commission by October 1st. So we have this process set forth in statute that we're required to follow. And so we wanted to provide a little bit of information. As I mentioned, we've had a number of workshops as well as gathered community input through the Doc Talks, through a public hearing, through the online resources. So we're working hard to get as much information as possible and sharing that with you in kind of, smaller bites so that you can digest the information and consider it as you ultimately have policy decisions to make. On the property tax, so the property tax mill levy really is the point that you have the discretion over. Okay, you set the property tax rate. That's the mill levy. Those mean the same things. And we get the final valuations from the assessor on June 15th. That's statutorily required. And what was shown in the final valuations was a net total of 13.88%. We did feel like it was important you understand that when we look at those valuations, it's by far the majority of it is the real property. So that is the majority of the assessed value. But the real property increase was 15.5%. Personal property for businesses, and of course, we had the presentation about how the manufacturing equipment was taken off the books by the state legislature, but these are just typical business personal property, computers, copiers, those kinds of things. Those actually went down in assessed value. So as the assessed value goes up, you're going to pay more in taxes if your tax rate's the same. As the assessed value goes down, like it is for business personal, you're going to pay less. It's a good analogy to think about when you pay more at the grocery store for a loaf of bread, your sales tax is going to go up because your base product went up in price. Okay, so it's the same analogy when it comes to your property. We also have a small component of our property that is for utilities, primarily that's railroads. But it's also other tax-paying utilities. So these are only the tax-paying utilities, and they are going up 2.1%. So when you net that all together, the net total increase in assessed valuation is 13.88% based on the final numbers we have. So just sharing information. In terms of the city side, it's more complicated because unified government has city and county. So we've tried to equip you with some information for you to digest, for you to have as a reference document. But this kind of outlines information financially. We talk a lot about the tax rate, the mill levy, but we want to also focus on the dollar amounts that we're talking about. So for the city property tax mill levy, there's two components is all. So it's a little more straightforward than on the county side, which has multiple funds. There's a general fund and there's the debt fund. And the total mill levy tax rate was 38.459. Okay. The breakdown of that is 21.42 is for the general fund. And for 24, the debt was 17.0381. We are in the process of updating that number to determine what our requirement is going to be for debt. So we don't have that final number. So some of this is for illustration purposes only, but just to talk us through how this actually works. So revenue neutral is what a lot of our conversation has been around. And essentially what that means is you look at the revenue that was generated from property tax from the prior year, and you back into what tax levy would be required because the increase in the assessed value, which is from reassessment, but it's also from new development, would be required to generate the same number of tax dollars. So your revenue is neutral. Your tax levy is the variable, but in the revenue neutral situation, it's actually a fixed amount that you're then targeting and backing into. If we were to do a flat levy, this means that your tax rate does not change, okay? We've talked about, we've had reassessment, we've had new development. Those two things are what constitutes that 13.88% increase in assessed value, okay? So our assessed value has gone up. So if we were to keep our tax levy the same, but our assessed value, just like your loaf of bread, your assessed value's gone up, the net impact of that in terms of tax revenues would be $8.7 million in additional revenue that's from the property tax specifically. If we were to reduce, and I put illustrations on this table simply because they're easy for you to do calculations. I mean, this is not a recommendation for 1 or 2 or 10, but because it's an easy multiplier. So as you get information and as you digest what ultimately you want to see us do, this gives you the information to do those calculations. So for the total tax levy, if we were to do a 1 mil reduction, then compared to the flat levy option, we would be a decrease of $1.8 million. Okay, and our mill levy would be decreased. You see how it goes 37.459. Last year it was 38.459. If we were to do a 2 mil reduction, we go down to 36.459, and the net effect of that is that compared to if we were a flat levy, it would be a reduction of 3.7 million. Okay, obviously, depending on which scenario you compare against, when you look at the revenue neutral side of 63 million, you can see what the net effect of that would be. So it's, in terms of doing the comparisons and what dollar amount we're talking about. This is intended to be able to give you information of for every 1 mil that you reduce in the city levy, it's $1.8 million, and this is in total. So again, this is just information. I do want to highlight, and I think our county administrator has talked with you also about the mill rate for debt on the city side is very high. It's 44% of the total. And that is something as your new CFO that I'm working on a debt policy to bring forward to you all so that we can look at how to right size that and what is the best practice and then a plan forward of how might we get there, because that could also provide tax relief, frankly, if we're able to better manage debt. Debt is an obligation. Once it's issued, it's not discretionary. We are required to pay our debt payments, but there's an opportunity there if we do a little bit of strategic management on our debt that might be able to help us in the coming years. So when you look at, and this is only the general fund, so I pulled the debt out of this. Again, these are just illustrations for you. So when you look at the portion of the mill levy that is just for the general fund, you can see that we had $35.1 million in FY24. So revenue neutral means that we would still only have $35.1 million, right? The revenue stays neutral. You can see how the tax rate would go down. It would go from the 21.4 down to 18.8. Okay. Now at the bottom line, when you see total revenues, considering all sources, this is information you haven't seen yet. It's new information, but it gives you a context. Okay. So this is the general fund in total. The property tax is one part of the general fund, but it's not the only part of the general fund. What we do expect in sales tax, use taxes, fees, all the other things that are included in the general fund is that we are anticipating growth. So something that this slide tells you is that we will have a net change of $4.5 million simply based on the other revenues that are part of the general fund. Okay, regardless of, so if we were revenue neutral for the property tax, all the other revenue sources would generate more revenue for then the county to meet its obligations, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. The flat levy, same information there. This is if we were to say, okay, we've had reassessment, we've had new growth, then we keep our levy the same, but we can calculate, okay, the assessed value went up, so how much more would be gained in the property taxes? It's the $4.8 million plus that other revenue from the other sources. Okay, so the sales tax, the use tax. So you'd have a net increase to your general fund of 9.3, almost 9.4. Then the math continues. So then if you do the 1 mil reduction, you can see what the impact is. And that's a reduction off of the flat levy. Okay, so for the taxpayer, they paid for the general fund 21.4214. So to get a 1 mil reduction for the taxpayer, that's the net effect of what it would do in terms of the budget for the general fund. For a 2 mil reduction, again, that's what the math shows in terms of the reduction. So again, this isn't a recommendation, but it's an easy multiplier for you so that you can think about, we talk a lot about the tax rate or the mill levy, but we need to translate that into how many dollars are we talking about that we're looking to either forego or in some cases have to cut out of our operating budgets in order to have a balanced budget. So this is a resource document for you. One of the other things that affects the city's general fund and one of the larger revenue sources is the BPU pilot, which we've talked about several times and the commission's talked about, and we've heard you, as well as the residents and the desire to reduce that pilot payment. The promise of getting to 9.9% is a $2 million, $2.3 million cost annually to the general fund. So one of the things that we have done is we've looked at just from new houses, new businesses, just general new growth, as well as the water rate increase that's already been approved by the BPU board of 6% for next year. That revenue projection's $1.1 million. So what we're building so far into the budget is to reduce the pilot by 1%. So from the 11.9 down to the 10.9 to move in the right direction of reducing that amount. In addition to other topics of conversation in terms of that's not really a user fee passed on to the customer. It's on the gross operating revenue or BPU. But just when looking at the math and understanding the common language that people have had, we're looking at trying to achieve a 1% reduction at least in the FY25 budget. The way that we plan to do that is to offset by the growth. So in a way, it's revenue neutral on the residential side only, but revenue neutral for the UG, for the city's general fund. So the growth from just general growth as well as the growth from the water rate increases, we would forgo. And that would effectively achieve getting us down to 10.9%. Through our discussions with the commission, there's been other suggestions. And so we just throw that out there. Again, not looking for a decision tonight, but just as a policy consideration over the coming couple of months until you have to approve a budget. But another alternative would be in lieu of the pilot relief program that was established last year, which is budgeted at about $750,000. We'd have to adjust the budget a little bit more, but we could achieve the full 2% reduction to get us down to the 9.9%, be done with the discussion about the promise of getting there, benefiting all people, not just the people that benefit from that program. And also with the understanding that BPU does have a utility assistance program for people in need. So they have a fund that they have available as well. So there is a resource available to people. So that's an alternative just to think on. Again, we're not asking for decisions, but we're putting together a budget that does at minimum include that reduction. Down at the bottom's reference information. If we were to do it for all non-residential customers, we're talking about quite a bit more. That would be a cost to the general fund. And one of the thoughts that we have about that is a lot of our large customers are nonprofits, and they don't contribute to the general fund because they don't pay property taxes. And because of that, because they're nonprofits, then the way that they contribute to things like fire and to police or to the courts is through basically the pilot payment. So it's a way that they do contribute for that. So it's not something that we're looking at and feel like we could tackle this year, but certainly something that's on radar for future consideration and discussion and direction. So the county side gets a little more complicated, of course. So I'm going to focus in on just the general fund. I'm not going to do the total picture and then come down to the general fund. I'm going to just do the general fund because it's the largest portion of our property tax rates on the county side. The total mill is actually 37.3132. It's down at the bottom, of which currently the property tax rate is 28.1797. So it's about 76% of the total. So again, this is information for you. It's illustrated. We will be bringing forward information for all the other funds as well. And then the county administrator will make a recommendation ultimately on that. So this is information for you. But if we were on the general fund only to reduce that levy, so it works the same as on the city side. But if we were to go revenue neutral, essentially our revenues stay flat, right? Because we were 51.9 million this year. Revenue neutral means we're at 51.9. And what happens is we back into a tax rate, which is less than what our tax rate is now. Okay, it's revenue neutral. If we were to adopt a flat levy, which means the tax rate, the levy rate doesn't change, then we take the full growth of reassessment and from new growth, and we can calculate that the net impact to the general fund would be $7.3 million. If we were to reduce from that point down by $1 million, or from the next for 2 mills, then you can see the net effect. We are still gaining revenue in the general fund, just not as much. And in a moment or two, I've got a slide that I hope to share with you some of the things we know, so you have a context of what does that mean, and is that a good thing or is that enough? But it's a context for you in terms of the decisions that you'll have to be making in the next several months. For the total revenue, again, this is just general fund, then we have a different situation on the county side. So the property tax levels are the same numbers as you just saw on the previous slide. But our other revenues, we are anticipating are going to decline based on the projections that the budget office has done. So for revenue neutral, it's really not revenue neutral because the fund is made up of more than just property tax. Property tax will be revenue neutral, 51.964. Okay, but because the other revenues are forecasted to be less, we would actually have a net decline of 2.4 million. Okay, because we're seeing things that are declining. In terms of the flat levy, if we were to keep the levy the same, you would have growth in property tax, but again, because other revenues are decreasing, you're going to have a net bottom line of about 4.9 million. Okay, and that's basically the 7 million minus the 2.4. Okay, and you can see then, again, these are for illustrative purposes. We're not suggesting that's the right answer or the right amount, but that way you can do the math and you can understand the impact those dollar decisions have when we change the tax levy. Okay, so this is some information that I feel like is incredibly important because it gives context to the conversation. We are still early in the budget process. As we mentioned, you've just heard from a couple of our constitutional offices and what their needs are. A couple things that in those charts that we just went through that are not yet built in because we haven't proposed a budget to you yet. The BPU pilot reduction, we know that's at $1.1 million. Okay, so we haven't built that revenue reduction in yet on those charts, because it'll be part of the county administrator's budget proposal and ultimately you all will decide. We know that contractually we have pay increases that are required with our various unions. And so we've projected a 3% plus benefit increases that are expected, which is primarily the compounding impact of a pay increase of 3% on things like Medicare and so forth. Of what that dollar amount is, and that is roughly $6 million. We are anticipating, you haven't heard it yet, and again, you'll see a lot of the department's budget requests that they've made, but we are anticipating IT cost in particular to go up, and this is on the city side of $1.4 million. The primary reason for that is maintenance agreements on all of our enterprise systems go up. But also we need to do some additional enhancements due to cybersecurity, which frankly is facing all organizations, and we need to spend some more money to ensure our systems are safe. Litigation on the city side, we are projecting that an additional $1 million allocation would be required based on the trend that we've seen in terms of litigation and settlements that we need to replenish that fund. And so again, more information will be coming forward in terms of the details. These are just some of the things that we know right now. And then for transit, the ATA contract is expected to go up by 2.4 million. They were able to, for a couple of years, use ARPA money for that, and they got a direct allocation. This wasn't the 80 million that came to the UG. But ARPA is ending, and so that federal allocation that they got is ending. So to provide the same level of service they currently provide, that would be another 2.4 million. Okay, so that's a lot of just high level information. So those things alone total almost $12 million in additional funding or cutting expenses. Okay, because again, we are not asking you to make a decision on the property tax at this point. We do know that if we were to have the tax levy stay the same because of the new growth and because of the increase in assessed value, it'd be roughly 9.4 million. But that would also have no additional money that would go to the reserves, which is also a concern that's been brought before you. So it's not enough, right? Just for those things. But it doesn't mean that the property tax is the only solution. It's certainly not. There are other solutions that can be pursued as well, and that's the whole point of the budget process. So we get ahead of ourselves with this resolution that has to be adopted before you've had an opportunity to see all of those different departmental budget requests and needs and make a decision. But we don't really have a choice because that's the statute. On the county side, we know that we started out the year upside down. To balance our budget, our expected expenditures dipped into our fund balance by a little more than $2 million. So assuming the same expenses this year, and I'm not making that assumption, but that number tells you then you would have $2 million out of the fund balance again, because our operating budget are ongoing operations, okay? And it's not to predetermine that decision, but it's just to make sure that you keep that context in mind. We were not structurally balanced in that fund when the budget was adopted for 24. We also, as I highlighted, the other revenues that go into the county general fund are anticipated to decline. That's 2.4 million. The pay increase on the county side is reflected there of 2.5 million. One of the things that the sheriff highlighted was the increased cost of contractual obligations that we have for housing, for food, for medical. And the dollar amount that goes with that is going up from 1.63 million to 2.17. So it's a contractual obligation that we have. IT costs on the county side are looking to increase about 900,000. And again, a lot of that is contractual. It's your maintenance agreements on your enterprise systems and cybersecurity enhancements. More information, more details will be forthcoming, but it's just, I felt like it was important to highlight a few of these things so that you have a context for the property tax is one component of two funds, or multiple funds actually, but the city side and the county side. It's a component that funds a lot of services. And we already know a few things that are pretty definitive, that are increases that are going to occur in expenses that we will either have to cover through cost reductions or through increased revenues from keeping our mill levy, our tax rate flat, or some adjustment to it. Okay, so it gives you a context for some of that, and a lot more information will be forthcoming. I skipped over at the very top, but it's an incredibly important point. At the very top is inflation, the CPI rate. Okay, we're not immune to this as a governmental entity. So we're paying more for copy paper. We're paying more for everything, computers. The CPI rate is 2.7% year over year. But what's really important about that is if you go back in time, a couple of years back to 2020, you will see that it compounded. When they tell you that that's the inflation rate or the CPI, they tell you, oh, it's only 2.7, but that's on the previous year base. So if you look at what it was in 2020, it was, well, 21, it was like 8% I've got the details, but and then the next year it was about 5%. So it compounds on top of itself. So if you look at just those years since 2020, it's really been about more than 20, almost 21% of basically inflation, the cost of doing business. And then on the public works side, it's even significantly more. I'm pulling the details on that. I simply ran out of time, but we know that the cost of construction it's just astronomical. And it's gone up significantly, anywhere from 10 to 15% per year compared to the prior year. So that is also a compounding number. So if something cost you 100,000 last year, it costs you 110,000 this year. And then if it's going to be another 10%, it's on 110,000, right? It's on that bigger number. So it's compounding. So the cost of doing business is just simply more. Other things that go into putting together a budget. So we've heard you. The commission, has certainly set some priorities. The first one being fiscal sustainability, which state statute does require. We have an adopted balanced budget, so that is a requirement. We cannot deficit spend. But unfortunately, like I had pointed out on the county side, we have had to dip into our reserves in order to have a balanced budget. Okay, which means essentially you're paying for ongoing cost with one-time money. All right. So it's not structurally balanced. You want your ongoing revenues to pay all of your ongoing cost. And then we've also emphasized the importance of having a 20% fund balance, which I will share with you. Many cities and counties and universities and colleges experienced firsthand how important that was when COVID hit. And they were hit with not having enough money for things like payroll and what they were going to do without a rainy day fund, essentially. So it is a real impact. It's a very important part of having a fiscally sustainable budget. Of course, we want to foster economic development, which lifts up the entire community. We want to focus on good quality service and communication, and we need to improve our infrastructure. We've heard loud and clear from the mayor and the commission that you're looking for tax relief for the residents. So we've heard the consensus, the direction that you all are providing. We've also heard that you're seeking BPU pilot relief for the residents. So we've heard that as well. We're looking at all that input that we've gotten from the public, and we'll likely get some more input tonight in terms of the process and hearing the pleas for both of those things, but also the request for additional or different services or better services. That all goes into the mix. We're still looking at forecasting the other revenues. We have all the departments that have submitted their requested needs that will come before you. And then probably most important is we're looking for cost efficiencies and cost cutting. We're looking for things like the mayor asked about a few minutes ago. When there's an opportunity, is there a duplication? Is there a way to use technology instead of having it the way that we've used it currently? How can we be more efficient and more cost effective, which is simply a matter of good governance and good management. So when we're putting together a budget, these are all the things that we're looking at. We know that there's some needed expenditures. Okay. We know that there's policy considerations. We're still putting together final revenue projections. I mean, frankly, at this point, we don't even have 6 months of the current year in, and we're forecasting sales tax revenues, for example, for all of next year. So it's a matter of the timing of these things. Another thing that we felt like would be helpful to have as a reference for you is a quick calculation of how do property taxes affect the citizens. Now, we know that all houses aren't 100,000. We know that. And in fact, the budget department in one of the workshops provided information based on the average value of houses, which was a little more than 200,000 in Wyandotte County. But we provide this to you because it's a resource document. It's an easy way to calculate. So if your house is $100,000 appraised value, okay, in the state of Kansas, it's taken times 11.5%, and that becomes your assessed value divided by 1,000. And then taken by the tax rate, and this is just the current tax rate. So on the city side, you would have paid $442.49 in property tax. Okay, that's on 100,000. So if you were 300,000, you're going to take that times 3. If you were 50,000, you're going to take it in half. But it's just, again, an illustration that gives you a resource that when you're talking to constituents, you can relate to them information. Same side over on the county side, it's the same math, a different tax rate, but it gives you good information. And as you contemplate what the tax levy should be, the mill levy should be for the coming year, you can plug that in and see what the net effect would be to the citizen. And then you can evaluate as a mayor and commission, is it worth the trade-off or not? Is that enough of relief or not for what would be forgone in terms of services? We've also heard a lot of conversation about what's the return on investment? Where are my dollars going? What am I paying for? So this is a slide you've actually seen before, but it is the list of services between the city side and the county side that show you what the dollars go for. So on the county side, because we just had our constitutional offices, we have the sheriff, we have the jail, we have the district court, the district attorney. This is what those dollars are going for. They go towards actual services. On the city side, you can see and read the list there, but it's the parks, it's the police, it's the fire, it's street maintenance. So you can see what the list of those services are. It's municipal court. There are some services that are shared between the two funding sources. And so we're putting together like an at a glance, so you can see for each one of these functions, how much is city, how much is county in terms of the general fund. So again, you just have that as a resource. So that's a lot of information, but again, we're not asking the commission and the mayor to make a decision tonight, except to adopt the resolution with the intent to exceed revenue neutral, understanding that we have heard you. We understand there's a desire for tax relief. We understand there's a desire for pilot relief. We also are gathering information to provide to you on what the needs are of the community in terms of all of the departments. We've shared with you some of the things we know in terms of expenditures that are required. And so that's why we don't ask you to make a decision to set the tax levy this early in the process. It's simply too early. But we need the time and preserve the option so that you can have all the information when you ultimately set the tax levy, which doesn't occur until the end of August. So what the resolution does is simply preserves that option. It preserves the discussion. No action is actually an action. Okay, I think it's important we understand that. If the mayor and the commission were to decide, I'm not going to act on that, then you're essentially saying you're going revenue neutral. And that would be some pretty significant cost cutting that would be required in addition to the revenue impact, but also in terms of those other known things that we know are going to cost more. Contractual obligations, for example. So a few things that happen in between. So we have until July 20th, and we simply notify the county clerk whether or not we're intending to exceed revenue neutral or at least want to preserve that option. Then the clerk is required by statute to mail out notices to the property owners, and they notify on those notices, they notify when those hearings are. And as you know, the public has been definitely showing up and sharing their thoughts at those public hearings that we've had from this year, but previous years too. It's intended to make sure that they are aware of their opportunity for input. August 8th is when the county administrator will be making a recommendation to you on the budget. So with that, when he's got all of the information on all of the revenue projections, on what the needs are and which ones he's suggesting that we fund and where there's cost cutting that's going to be done, he'll provide you with a package of here's a proposed budget. And all of that is a whole lot more information than just the property tax. Okay, but the property tax is a piece of it. And so his recommendation will be made based on a recommended decision for the property taxes. Okay. But you don't have to actually have the public hearing. We have that slated till August 26th. That's when you have your final public hearing on the revenue neutral rate for the property tax. And you have your public hearing on the budget that's been proposed. So you have about a month from the point that you've gotten a proposed budget to when we are asking you to make a decision. And ultimately, we have the approval of the budget on August 29th. We do actually have until September 30th. So we have a little bit of time built in there should there be more discussion that's needed and we need some additional meetings. So we have time built in there to make sure that the process is thorough and you're given ample time to do your due diligence. But again, I know it's confusing because when a resolution is put before you, to ask you to pass a resolution of intent to exceed revenue neutral, it feels like a decision. That's not our language. That's the state statute's language. We don't get to pick that language. All we are doing is saying, we need you all to have more time to get all the information so that ultimately you make that decision. It's not locking you into the current tax levy. It's not locking you into a set reduction. It's simply preserving the time frame for the conversation. Okay, but the language of it feels more like a decision. So with that, I'm going to pause. I don't know if anybody has questions, but hopefully we've got a little bit of time for that.
Thank you. Commissioner Stites.
Stites District 7. On one of your slides, you had said that revenue on the county side was expected to decline. What's an example of that? What,
In the general fund, one of the biggest is interest earnings. We've seen, really good interest earnings in terms of the last few years, but we don't anticipate that's going to continue. So that's one of the details. I don't know if you want to add anything, Reggie or Michael, but I remember that being one of the bigger ones.
Also, vehicle registrations are also have been going down. Property tax from those.
any idea what we can contribute that to?
On vehicles, it's completely conjecture, but the cost of vehicles, just like everything, a little bit like the cost of housing, the cost of vehicles went up extraordinarily high. And so people, honestly, there's higher delinquencies, but people stop buying new vehicles as well. And so it's just a factor of just the general economy.
Do we have anything that substantiates that new vehicle registrations are down?
Just the amount of revenue that is coming in regarding it.
Okay. And the other question that I had was the 20% fund balance versus, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, weren't we targeting, wasn't last year 17% in our fund balance? And then why is it now changed to 20?
I think we're at 17.
Yeah, I think we are, and we actually were targeting 25%. That's what our rating agencies would like us to have is 25%.
But in our
No, our
in the
funds.
presentation, it was 20.
That's right. So 20% is what the Government Accounting Offices Board, GASB, it's a best practice. It's recommended for municipalities and counties throughout the country to have at least a 20% fund balance. 25% was feedback, as Reggie said, and that's probably driven more by the fact because we issue a lot of debt. They're wanting to make sure they kind of hedge against that, although even in debt, there's some protections in terms of reserves. But that was feedback that we had gotten. 17% is one of, I believe it's the city side that has a 17% as of 24. But we'll confirm that,
Okay.
what the fund balances are on both.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns.
Yeah, Shelley, I think it's very important that you emphasize to the citizens tonight that we are not voting on revenue neutral or not. I think the public thinks we are. And so I just don't want this resolution to confuse the citizens out there. So if you can make it very clear again.
Yep.
Okay,
It is confusing. I mean, the way.
it is
the
confusing.
Title of it's confusing.
Right. Right. But I think a lot of them, that's what they're after. So anyway.
Sorry, Commissioner Stein.
Yeah, I just had one follow-up to that. Since the inception and consolidation of the unified government, when any time that there has been a request to exceed revenue neutral, how many times in that creation of the unified government has the UG actually went revenue neutral?
Revenue neutral, it just started in 2021. In each of those years, we have chose to the intent to exceed revenue neutral.
It was a new statute.
So we've never went revenue neutral.
We have never went revenue
This
neutral, but
resolution is
we
getting
have
us-
reduced it.
Voting on revenue neutral tonight.
Say it
We
again.
will be voting on revenue neutral tonight. That's what we gotta say.
No, we will be.
Okay, Dr. Hill, sorry.
Okay, I'm totally confused. So you're saying we are voting revenue neutral, and then somebody else is saying, no, we're not voting revenue neutral.
You're not. You're voting for, we're asking you all to vote for a resolution
For the resolution.
that establishes the right
Okay.
to exceed revenue neutral. It does not mean that you will exceed revenue neutral. It doesn't set the tax levy. It doesn't set any of that. All it simply does is preserve the option for the commission once you see the budget. But the way the statute's written, it's called the resolution of intent to exceed revenue neutral. So it appears like you're making a decision, but you're not. You can still decide later to go revenue neutral. But it's just the title of how the statute requires it, but you're not setting the tax levy today. You don't have enough information yet for you to, I mean, you all can do whatever you want, of course, but you haven't seen a lot of information to be able to make an informed decision. And so that's why this gets a little ahead of a typical budget process for a government that has a January budget. And they set the dates. All of these dates are set in the statute. We don't get to set the dates. Otherwise, we wouldn't bring this forward until later in the process, once you've seen the budget and you're actually setting the tax levy. So before the statute was passed in 21, you wouldn't be doing any of this. You would be waiting, you'd be getting the budgets, you'd be looking at what the requests are, what the revenue projections are. And then you'd be adopting a budget, which would include what the property tax rate would be. Okay, but this requires extra steps in the process.
Okay, so a couple of things. Number one, you said we have not been presented a budget yet.
Correct.
So that's good information to know. We're not voting on something that we haven't ever seen yet. That's number one. And then number two is, this is my other question. Does revenue neutral mean that taxes will not increase?
No, it doesn't, because revenue neutral means that the unified government will not receive additional tax revenue, from either reassessment or from growth. How that translates to you as an individual depends on what your personal property, your real property, reassessed at. Okay, and we know that by and large, reassessment caused values to go up. Okay, the value of the house went up. So either the tax levy changes, okay, or the tax levy doesn't change. And if it doesn't change because your value went up, your taxes will go up. Think about the bread at the store. Okay, if it went from $1 to $1.50, you're going to pay more in sales tax because now it's on $1.50.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because several constituents have contacted me very concerned that we are trying purposely to raise their taxes. And I want to make it clear that that's not what I would want to do. I would not want to raise the taxes. And I think the constituents need to realize a vote for revenue neutral does not necessarily mean that their taxes will not increase.
That's right. And
So that's a very important part to me, because one individual said to me, "Are you for revenue neutral or not?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to figure it out." And so this explanation helps me. Because one of the things I'm really concerned about is we've gotten a lot of information, but no budget. And I can't even give a good explanation to the constituents because I haven't seen the budget. I don't know what I'm voting on or anything, but just to hear that this is just a resolution that just gives us time to make a quality decision is encouraging. But the constituents do not see it that way. I've had several say, "Please don't raise my taxes. I can't do anymore. I'm already trying to move out of here." So I just think it's real important for me to understand about revenue neutral not necessarily going to not raise your taxes. Thank you.
the other thing to keep in mind as you talk with your constituents is that we are one tax district, well, we're two, but we're one of many. Okay, so when, at the end of the day, when people look at their tax bill, they look at how many dollars in total they're paying. Okay, and there's variables. The things that vary are your assessed value, And then the tax levy for all of the taxing districts. That includes your school district, that includes your library, it includes all of these other taxing districts, the community college. All of those elected bodies are making decisions too. So it is complicated.
Yeah, it is. Okay, one last question, I promise. I heard earlier this year in one of our meetings that all the taxing entities should meet so that we together could come up with a plan on how to work together to not raise taxes in our community. Is that a possibility? Who would put that together? I've heard it mentioned several times, but I haven't heard a date or a time or anything.
Thank you. That's a good question. I know we facilitated some of those meetings last year. There may be legal implications of that. You want to weigh in, counsel?
Yes, if there were joint meetings, then both entities would have to notice them as public meetings.
Okay. But it can happen in my office usually. We can facilitate that and we'll make that happen at the request of the commission.
I'm sorry, would that be before the budget is?
It's not so much predicated on the date of the budget as it is opposed to trying to get all these taxing entities and all the relevant people schedules aligned to meet. That's the biggest challenge. You follow me?
Okay,
Because you've got numerous people on these boards and then trying to get them all in one place. And then how you structure those meetings, that the logistics of that is another challenge.
okay, thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner Burrows.
Mayor. Well, Ms. Knieven, thank you for a very thorough presentation this evening. Very easy to follow. I like simplicity when I'm looking at budgets, and you've made this pretty transparent. I want to share with you what I've pulled from it, if I may, and if I'm incorrect, please share it with me where I'm at. And I'm looking at the page talks about expenditure considerations. I see $23 million in new projected requests. But in the documents, it shows if we don't do revenue neutral and just leave flat tax, it's only 14.2 million. So we're already $9 million underwater from the requests. So the only way we would be able to meet the $23 million in projected requests would be to raise taxes or fees to cover those costs. And I'm really pleased that you made comment about the city and county comparison on the 11.5% on assessed value, because I multiplied these by 2, by 3, by 4, by 500,000 to get to a number, but it wasn't inclusive of the other taxing entities, which are really hidden costs. So when you talk about that tax increase, even though if we were to go revenue neutral, the new appraised value wouldn't hit until the next budget cycle. But those that are not using revenue neutral would be passing the tax increase on to the public. And if that's incorrect, please correct me.
It's not incorrect. The issue, if you will, that's really precipitated all of this is that the assessed value has gone up, and it's gone up extraordinarily, just like inflation. And there might be other remedies to look at how to address that. For example, there in Kansas, we have the Homestead Act, which helps for senior citizens. There could be other ways statutorily that maybe those things could be addressed. But that's what's precipitated a lot of this is the cost of goods, the cost of bread, the cost of housing's all gone up.
I think, and I appreciate that. What I found a little fascinating was the amount of revenue that we would take in. And I think you put it right up very front. It was like 14 million. I went through and was calculating some numbers. So I hope those are correct. But in doing so, it's just very concerning when we have talked about budget constraints and I see $23 million of need coming forward when our projected tax increase, if we choose to do nothing, is still $9 million short. So there's a disconnect somewhere in what we're trying to do. And I would hope that we can't do it all at one fell swoop because it's not prudent to do so. However, to 23 million, if we needed only 14 million and didn't do anything and took the 14 million, we are still $9 million short. So $9 million in cuts are going to have to occur somewhere. And, you know, people talk about those cuts are to services. We don't know what those cuts are. When there's comments made that we're going to have to cut personnel, we're going to have to cut services, there can be cuts, there can be efficiencies. It's very easy to throw what I call the low-hanging fruit under the bus when it comes to really looking at these budgets and being prudent and strategic in how we go about restructuring our budget. But I want to thank you for the walk through this evening because this was very transparent and I think it really hit home. So thank you very much.
And I do want to emphasize that the tax levy, property tax, one variable. Okay, it's an important one and it's a big one. And it's the one that probably hits home most to residents. But there's other revenue sources that also come into play. Then there's also known increases, but then there's also how can we cut costs? It's not just through raising revenue, it's both. Just like any of us on our own budgets, you might need to get a second job if your costs go up or reduce your cost, right? So it's no different. We're just talking about a lot bigger numbers, but it's really no different. And so, you know, we understand that. And I hope one of the takeaways that the mayor and the commission have is that we're hearing you. And the budget that we're putting together will do our very best to balance all of these things: property tax relief, pilot relief, looking at these known things we have coming at us, cyber events, contractual obligations, new requests for services. You just heard some of them, but there's many others. We got to balance all of that, and you all have to have time to be able to be presented all that information so that then you can make a decision. And a decision you will have to make in late August is what should our property tax rate be for the next year? But it fits into a bigger picture. So like I said, it's a unique thing to Kansas. It's not this way in Missouri. But it is the process that we have. And I think it's intended I think it was intended to hold entities accountable. And so there's a good intention in this, but it's just that there's a lot of levers to pull. And so it's that you all have to look at the level of service. The citizens want a return on the investment, what they're paying. They've had these assessed values go up, and the only thing that you all can do is adjust the tax levy. Okay, about that. Based on the current law, there could be things to look at in the future that could help hedge against that to protect people so they have more time to adjust to increased values. Okay, and it then takes the issue a little bit down in terms of the impact it has on people and on their budgets, because it's real. I mean, it's not that the citizens aren't being legitimately honest with what the needs are. They absolutely are. And we've seen it. It's not unique to Wyandotte County. It's been an issue from when I worked across the state line in a large county. It was an issue there, huge issue, where people were getting assessed values that had grown, 400%, because they hadn't gotten reassessed in 10 years. Okay, well, when you have an economy like what we've just gone through and you have inflation and all of these things happening, it catches up. Okay, and so there needs to be maybe at a higher level too, some policy discussions about what could be done about that. But all we have is the ability to share with you information. And so you only have part of it now, and it's simply because we're still developing it. And this just has to be done sooner in the process because of how the statute is. So some of our other taxing districts, their fiscal year starts July 1st. We don't start a fiscal year until January. So they're in even a bigger bind because they don't pass their intent or their budget until the end of August. Okay, because it's dictated in statute when that gets filed. Okay, a good 2 months after the start of the fiscal year. And that's how it is at the college, for example. So this is a well-intended policy, but it just doesn't really fit the processes that we have in place. So again, I totally understand the position that the commission and the mayor are in with this resolution of this intent to exceed, but you are not committing to a tax levy. You're not committing to exceed it. You're not committing to not exceed it. You're just not committing. It's simply preserving the option, and it has a timeline that goes with it in state statute that then will allow you to get more information in terms of the presented budget. Then you have to make policy decisions. What do we cut? What are legitimate expansions that are needed? We heard some tonight, like our victim advocates. What can we do with the property tax? All of that all goes into the mix so that you all ultimately then make a decision at the end of August.
Thank you, Administrator.
I guess I just want to add a couple things. The issue about fund balance came up. GASB, which is the Government Accounting Bureau, recommends a minimum of 17%. That's a 2-month reserve. They're highly encouraging governments to look at 25%, which I think we've incorporated as an ideal in our policy. Early in the budget presentations that Reggie led, there was a sheet from our rating agencies that said, if you want to improve your bond rating, with our rating at A2, I think we're at, or AA2, whatever it is, for us to improve it to get borrowing costs less, they'll want to see us plus 30% reserves. So those are things that we have to consider. This is also probably the first time in my time that you didn't have Reggie's 5-year budget model before you. And the discussion that we've had today is the snapshot for next fiscal year. And what we tried to do last year and will continue to do it this year is that you don't fall into the trap of managing your budget like a checkbook. I can't afford it this year, and that's the only decision I want to make. Or I can afford it this year, but can I afford it in year 3 and 4 with some projections out there? So we'll continue to present that. So you, as well as a lot of the information that Reggie and Shelley has presented, because our goal is to have you make the best informed decision to serve our citizens. And I can tell you, we've had some very interesting discussions at the staff level when it has come time to saying, well, the commission would like to see less property tax revenue, less BPU pilot revenue. And what does that mean to your operating budget? And because we've had some departments that really have never been asked to what impact would this have on your budget, and we're putting it in front of them, they're like, you're serious? Yes, we are. And so there is a lot of work to be done, but we don't want you to make decisions in a vacuum. And like I said, or like Shelley said, this is kind of a, pardon the vernacular, bass-ass backwards form of budgeting where we have a state requirement before you have any information to make the final decision that you want. So that's why I think our recommendation is that you pass it, but reserve the right for a final decision when you pass the budget, not this early in the process. Because if you pass it revenue neutral now, we're not going to tell you what you can do in expanded programs because those are off the table. We're going to probably tell you we're going to have to look hard at adjusting the cost side of our budget, which may, I'll put that in quotes, may mean cut services across the board. It may mean impacts that people are used to receiving from the UG not getting anymore. So we're not at that point in time for you to make those types of decisions because you don't have that information yet. So that's just your administrator talking.
Thank you.
Commissioner Davis and Commissioner Townsend both have their hands raised.
Go ahead, Commissioner Davis.
I'll defer to Commissioner Townsend. Her hand was up before mine.
Commissioner Townsend. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm getting used to some new equipment. And thank you, Commissioner Davis. I'll keep this short. I wasn't going to say anything, but first I want to commend CFO Canuvin and her entire staff, Budget Director Lindsay. And I am looking at the hard printout from, I think I have on here, this was our first presentation for this budget cycle on March 21st, 21. And it dealt with the revenue neutral issue. And in that, Budget Director Lindsay did give us a 5-year forecast of what it looked like for the city and county funds, revenue neutral and full valuation. So we do have some numbers. And CFO Canuvin's presentation was really great. I don't have the hard copy, so I was trying to listen to you, CFO, and watch the screen as well, but I'll get it. But simply put, and several of the commissioners who's spoken already, Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Stites, have alluded to the fact that, you know, to the public, we can't emphasize enough, this should be retitled Keeping the Door Open recommendation, because that's what it does. If this is passed tonight, it does not mean that at a later time, after this commission has more information about what people need in the departments, we've heard some of that tonight, and or cuts that the administrator just talked about, where that should go. Now, you know, cuts in services if that's appropriate. This just keeps the door open. That's what we should really call this document tonight as we discuss revenue neutral. And it does not mean that at a later date in time, as we go through this process, if the commission so sees fit, that we can still lower the mill levy rate. As I recall the discussion though, from March 21, the revenue neutral rate would force us into a mill reduction of, I think the number was about 8%. That may or may not fit what we're trying to do in terms of, as we said, look at the reserves we need to have. So that's all I wanted to say about it. Thank you. We're just keeping the door open for further discussion, more information, and more analysis. It doesn't mean constituents that we may not cut the levy rate, the mill rate at a later time. So, and it's amazing. It's just because in these last, 3 years, I believe, that we've had to do this. We've been setting, the mill levy or not to exceed for a long time. I mean, this from the state of Kansas has just caused a lot more attention to be drawn, but we just need to keep at this point our options open. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. So I do have a few questions. So what happens? Well, let me ask this. We have collective bargaining agreements that have, we all voted on, many of them were unanimously voted to approve, that binds the unified government to pay benefits and increases in salary. If we were to go revenue neutral, is there enough revenue in place for us to honor those collective bargaining agreements?
So the quickest way to answer that question is on the city side, no. Well, that's not true. So if that was the only thing that we were looking to do, was to fully fund those contractual obligations. So on the city side, it's roughly $6 million. And then we project, we'd still have to make cuts because the other revenues are going to grow 4.8 million, but that's not enough. So we'd have to make cuts. So unless there's some growth in the property tax revenue, not the tax rate, but the revenue, then we'd have to make other cuts to make up the difference to meet that contractual obligation. And then on the county side, the answer is also no, partly because we started out the year upside down. We started up $2 million upside down. And so when you put in that we have a contractual obligation for another couple million plus, then we're already starting out in not the greatest position. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you have to increase the revenue from property tax, which again can be a flat levy. Okay, that gets you an increase in revenue. It can be through reductions. On the general fund side, some of that is paid for through growth in other revenues. Okay, but it wouldn't be enough to fully fund that obligation. So we'd have to be looking for reductions.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think it's super important as we're having this conversation that we acknowledge the prior commitments that we made to our unions regarding our revenues. And those revenues do include property taxes to our employees who work hard. And of course, we have non-union employees that work hard as well. The constitutional offices, right, our election commission, the DA's office, many of them have this mandate that ironically is also set in place by the state that we provide them adequate resources. If we were to go revenue neutral, would we be able to honor the request from the constitutional offices on the county side of the budget?
I'm going to go with no, but it depends also on all the other decisions you have to make. Okay, so we can't absolutely say that it would be no, because hypothetically, if the district attorney needs 500,000 more, we could make reductions. In fact, he specifically called out 50,000 that he's making as a reduction within his budget. Okay, so we can approach some of those new asks through offsets, through reductions in budgets, in not just the department's budget, but in all the departments that are funded from that funding source. So it depends is the answer. And it just depends on there's a lot of levers to pull on this. You've got a lot of requests you haven't seen. We just tried to highlight a few things that we know because they're very contemporary. We know there's contractual obligations. We know that IT costs are just going through the roof. These are things we know. So we know that we're going to have to tackle them in a budget proposal. But there's no real solid way to say, yes or no, because it depends on all the other decisions you all have to make. We know that the ARPA money is going away. That's for sure happening. So it's going to be $2.4 million more for transit for the same level of service. A decision could be that the level of service changes. Okay, that's a decision until we can find more grant money. A decision could be that we look for reductions in transit or in other departments that would offset that. So there's lots of options still to go through. And I really want to emphasize that we feel like it's important. And I like the way that if we could get the state legislature to retitle this, keep the door open, or change the timing of this so that you're adopting this resolution once you have all the information and you're making just one decision on what the tax levy is going to be, because that's the real decision that you all have to make later in the budget process. Okay, right now it's premature to really ask you to make that decision or even an inclination because you simply don't have all the information.
Yeah. And I'll ask one more question. So we have economic development projects that received incentives. Those incentives, right, end. And that's kind of the whole point is, we'll help you get your project kind of off the ground. You're paying a pilot, right? You're paying, right, sales tax, what have you, depending upon your development agreement. But once your incentive is done, you're paying full market rate property taxes, right, and all that stuff. So are we able to realize the increase in revenue and the growth in our tax base if from economic development, projects, are we able to realize the growth in revenue for our tax base if we were to go revenue neutral?
No, we will not.
Can you explain a little bit more as to why we would not?
So what happens is we cap the revenue at the same amount of revenue we would collect in the prior year. So anything that, any excess value growth, we do not get to realize that.
So if a new business, take aside the economic development incentives, but it's a good point because you could have some that are coming off the books. Okay. But just a more simple way to think about it is if you have a new company that comes in, they build a new building, Amazon builds a new building, right? So if you cap your revenues, you don't realize any gain from new growth, new development for that year. Okay, so it's two things that go into that. It's the increase, the reassessments, but it's also new growth. Okay, and probably a third thing to your point, Commissioner, is economic development incentives that are coming off of the books and having the opportunity to realize the revenue from that. So it's an excellent point. I also know the Economic Development Council has prepared a report and they're looking at that exact issue right now. Have these projects that the UG has done really generated economic benefit? And they've been working on that report with a consultant to measure that and to provide you the data.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you, Mayor. Question for you and the administrator. I do think that the timing in the state statute around these requirements of revenue neutral are odd. And they do not match up with budget cycles at all. And I wonder if when we speak with when we make our policy recommendations to Topeka next year, if that should be something that we're asking them to please take a look at, because it's hard to even understand why the legislature would put dates like this into a state law, knowing they don't match up at all with the already existing laws around adopting budgets. It seems like it could be something we could ask in our legislative agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lopez.
Yeah, I appreciate what our administrator was saying about, what was funny is sometimes as a business grows too fast and as a growing business is like we're running things and a business can grow too fast and it could ultimately take a bath. And what I'm saying is sometimes we are growing at a high rate of speed. And I think we need to look at cutting some budgets, because we're growing way too fast and we need to slow it down. And we probably just need to go back and just shut this door of having this revenue neutral exceeding all that on the table. Just shut the door and just say, all right, this is what we need to do. We need to cut some fat off because we're growing way too fast and it's starting to hurt us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just had a few questions before we close. Looking at equating the additional revenues from the projected mill levy increase, I didn't see, maybe you're still working on it, but what would the projected budget be that we may be asking the commission to ask to pass?
It's still really early in the process, Mayor. So we don't know that yet. We're looking, throughout the month of July, we'll be working on those numbers. So we don't know what the expense budget will be yet.
But we're
still doing estimates on
467 that it is now, correct?
Say it again.
It's potentially set to be more than the 467 that it is now, correct?
Potentially, but I mean, depending on going through the process, what we see, we definitely will be having to make some cuts. Even to get new things in, we will have to reduce services.
If my memory serves me right, going back 5 years, the year before I became mayor, we had a $380 million budget. Am I correct?
I can't say I remember that right off. It is possible.
Quote me on it, but I think I'm in that ballpark. And then I became mayor as 421. I believe last year it was, the year after that, 432. Now we're operating in a $467 million budget. And then we're projected to exceed that. And so I guess in line with that, with the property value increases, I know the first year I became mayor, we equated that to about a 9 mil increase, exceeding revenue neutral. And I believe last year it may have been 13 or so, give or take. What would that be this year?
I think it's about a 9 mil this year also.
9 mils?
Yes.
So just if you add all those up and compound them, because I know the first year I was mayor, the commission decreased 2 mils on the increase. So instead of 9, it was 7. And last year, the commission chose to take the full increase from the valuation increase, which was 13 or something, give or take. Don't quote me on it. And so this year you're saying estimates may be around 9. So
That is, yes. But that doesn't mean we're going to take the whole 9.
well, it'll be up to the commission. I'm
Yes.
just, I know future,
And one thing
this isn't future of, a future indication of what this commission may do. I'm just going off what I've seen, since I've been here, is that, and I think it goes in line with what Commissioner Stites has said. We've had options for revenue neutral. And even before revenue neutral hit the books, the Truth in Taxation Law of 2021, it's been the same song and dance. We've continued to increase our budget. And I think there's some misconception that, we've reduced the mill. Technically, we have not reduced the mill. We've taken the increase, which equated to mills, and we do reduce the increase. So we didn't take the full increase. And that's what that is. Just my study of the truth in taxation laws. Basically, if we spent $1 last year and the commission chooses to go revenue neutral, that means we will have to spend $1 next year and budget within that $1. Is that correct?
The variable that's probably lost in that is inflation. Just very honestly, and if you just run rough numbers, and I'm not asserting that this is an absolute explanation, but 380 with 20% inflation compounded gets you to 460. Things are costing so much more, and that's not including, which in our budget, infrastructure is a huge part. It's just
I'm not
astronomical.
talking costs. I'm just talking the state law. The state law, basically, the truth in taxation law basically just limits you. That's what revenue neutral means. It caps you at basically operating the same budget going into your following year as the budget that you're operating in this year. Now, I've heard some things about, whether we're raising property taxes or whether we're not raising property taxes. The reality is when valuations go up, it equates into a mill increase, which you just acknowledged. And then if you equate that mill increase, for me, if I'm a homeowner, my property taxes do go up indirectly by virtue of the valuation increases that occur in the county. Revenue neutral mitigates that, not completely, but mitigates that from my understanding of reading the law and folks that I've asked, to the point that it's not as burdensome on some of our residents. Because what it does, it's forcing us, even with the cost increase, and every year I hear cost increase, to operate within a box that says, okay, you went revenue neutral. That means you're capped at operating within that box, which means you've got to find ways, like I would do if I was in a budget crunch, to tighten my belt, find cuts, bring about consolidated services, operate more efficiently, to give the people what they want. Why is this important to me? because I hear a lot about priorities and needs and things of those nature. But the one thing that I haven't heard that has not wavered is the request from our residents saying that they want property tax relief, real property tax relief. I can't even say with our current financial situation right now. I've talked to the administrator, I've talked to you all, and I appreciate the work you all have done that has taken that red out when I came back from my surgery. And it's pushed out to about 2030. Is that correct?
Yes, past 2030.
Yes, but that's predicated on property tax increases from valuation increases. Is that correct? So
But we don't, in the outer years with our estimate, we're not looking to get like a 13% increase, and that is very minimal. Like looking at like a 4% increase or so.
I get it, but it's still based on the valuation increases from not going revenue neutral. And that means whatever valuation increases are there, the intent of the unified government is to capture those dollars to do those things that you're saying that we need to do. What disturbing to me is that I don't see any options, and maybe it's just not there. And I'm not saying you're not doing it, but it would have been good to have something, or at least been told. Budget options that reflect streamlining and cutting for this commission to consider moving forward. When you talk about total budget numbers I talked about for 5 years, it'd be good for the commission to see that, to see how our budget has ballooned probably over the last 10 years, how the valuations have ballooned and what that equates into a mill levy, and see how that's increased. I think that the public, I would like to see that, and to see how much money that's generated and how that equates to these bloated budgets. The other thing that I'd like to, there's a slide there, and if you can go back, I don't know if you can still show the slide of all the services that we provide to our residents, which is great.
Maybe the next to the last slide of the, why Monica's getting that pulled up. And that's just a listing. I mean, it's incredibly high level information. It's not quantifying it for you.
And I'll be quick.
Third from the last.
Just have to go.
There you go. One thing that maybe would be helpful for me, I don't know about my colleagues, but an expense breakdown. I get that these are all the services, but what, that's great. We're paying for that as a generalization, but what exactly are we paying for? What are our taxpayers paying for? And then out of those things that we're paying for, the actual expenses down to the penny, what are obligations, be it statutorily or just to maintain the essential functions of running this government? And then you get beyond that, I think it would really be eye-opening to see, like I had to do when I was on the police department. I had to look at things that I wanted and things that we needed to keep services going. I think that'd be interesting to help this commission better guide our administrator and you all on better defining where we could find some of those cost savings. I think the overall thing that I'm looking at is, I think revenue neutral, the truth in taxation law, and I'll read something. And this comes from Kansas Senate Tax Committee Chair Karen Tyson. He says in 2 years, the truth in taxation law, or revenue neutral, has been shown to be effective in restricting taxing and spending increases in many local governments. Elected officials can certainly adjust spending to avoid property tax hikes if they want. Kansas Senate Tax Committee Chair Karen Tyson of Parker applauds the 2-year-old law. The revenue neutral rate law requires your government to give you a clear picture on how they are increasing your property taxes. And so when you go above revenue neutral, in effect, you are basically telling the residents your intent is to capture those additional revenues, which will cause a property tax increase. Now, how much is going to be at the discretion of the commission? And again, the commission has full discretion to, if they go above, to not take all of those revenues and budget, or they can go revenue neutral without even abiding by the revenue neutral law, and even lower the mill levies even lower if they want to. They have full discretion to do that. But I think this law really obligates the commission to operate more efficiently and to streamline and find those cost savings. Because just my opinion is I just think that continue to tax, to spend, to borrow, and I know we're trying to work on dipping into our reserve fund is not sustainable. Even when we pushed it out to the 2030, we still haven't resolved the problem. At some point, I urge this commission to take the political courage to do what is necessary to really bring this unified government into a level of fiscal responsibility and to bring our residents real tax relief. Every year I've heard the same thing from the commission. Maybe next year, oh, we need to look at it and see where we're at. Doesn't mean we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, but every year there's been a tax increase. And everywhere I go in this community, I have to deal with that. And so just one of the things that I wanted to say. All right, that's it. I was advised of the time. Is there any more questions? Thank you so much, staff. Great presentation. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, second?
I'm sorry, who made the motion? Thank you. Second,
Commissioner Lopez, second.
who was
Is there
our,
a second?
Commissioner Lopez, second.
thank you.
Okay, there's a motion, a second. Clerk, roll call.
Roll call, Lopez,
Yes, aye.
Stites, Davis,
Aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Burrows,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
Burns,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
motion carries.
We will, the staff has to get set up down in the chambers. We will convene, and I apologize to the public. This is a really important issue for our commission when you talk about our budget, but expect us to start promptly at 7:45.